media use?
Senator, what I said is I think it's important to look at the science. I know people widely talk about this as if that is something that's already been proven, and I think that the bulk of the scientific evidence does not support that.
Well, really, let me just remind you of some of the science from your own company. Instagram studied the effect of your platform on teenagers. Let me just read you some quotes from the Wall Street Journal's report on this. Company researchers found that Instagram is harmful for a sizable percentage of teenagers, most notably teenage girls. Here's a quote from your own study. Quote, "We make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls." Here's another quote. "Teens blamed Instagram," this is your study, "for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression."
11 seconds. In the billion-dollar architecture of a modern tech CEO's public relations strategy, 11 seconds is less than nothing. It is the gap between a question and a prepared answer. It is the half-breath before a trained spokesperson delivers a phrase that has been workshopped, focus grouped, and cleared by people paid. Extraordinary sums to make sure no 11-second window ever becomes a problem. But on January 31st, 2024, inside the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room, 11 seconds was enough to strip every layer of the most sophisticated legal and communications apparatus in American corporate history down to a man in a suit who could not find a single word to say. What the world watched that morning was not a typical congressional hearing. It was not the usual ritual where CEOs of trillion-dollar companies sit before senators who mispronounce their products' names and ask questions that miss the point by a decade. This was something rarer, the convergence of exactly the right evidence in exactly the right hands, in exactly the right room at the exact moment the country had run out of patience. And the question the nation is still sitting with is not a complicated one. It is this: if the most powerful technology company in human history conducted its own internal research, discovered that its products were psychologically damaging children at scale, documented those findings in writing, and then expanded those products anyway, what do we call that? And what does justice look like for the millions of families who never saw the research? To understand what happened in that room, you cannot start with the hearing itself. You have to go back 6 years to a conference room at Meta headquarters in Menlo Park, California, where a team of data scientists quietly produced a document that would eventually become one of the most dangerous pieces of paper in Silicon Valley. History. The document is called the Teen Mental Health Deep Dive. It was not a leak, not a hacker's trophy, not a whistleblower's final act before being escorted out of the building. It was an internal research project commissioned by Meta's own growth and product teams, the very people whose job was to make Instagram larger, faster, and harder to leave. They wanted to understand their users. They got far more than they bargained for. The findings were not ambiguous. They were not wrapped in the careful, conditional language of academic research, where every conclusion is padded with caveats. They were blunt, specific, and devastating. The research found that Instagram made body image issues significantly worse for 1 in 3 teenage girls. It found that among teenagers who reported suicidal ideation, a measurable percentage traced those thoughts to content they encountered on the platform. It found that the same mechanisms the algorithm used to maximize engagement, comparison loops, aspirational content, infinite scroll, were also the mechanisms creating compulsive and harmful usage patterns. In developing minds, the most chilling line in the document was written by Meta's own researchers, in their own words, for an audience never meant to include the United States Senate. The line read, "Teens blame Instagram for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression, not outside researchers, not advocacy groups, not angry parents, Meta's own people." In a private document describing the damage their platform was doing, and then the company expanded Instagram's reach to younger users anyway. That is the trap that was waiting in Senator Josh Hawley's briefcase on the morning of January 31st, 2024. Not a surprise witness, not a leaked phone call, not evidence Meta could dismiss as fabricated or misattributed, a document that came from inside the House. Mark Zuckerberg had appeared before Congress before, multiple times. Each appearance followed a pattern big tech had perfected over a decade of regulatory scrutiny. You hire the best legal minds in Washington to run mock hearings for weeks. You develop answer frameworks for every line of questioning. You rehearse posture, cadence, and the exact angle of respectful attention that concedes nothing. You arrive understanding that Congress has limited time, limited technical expertise, and that if you can simply survive the clock, you win. On that January morning, Zuckerberg entered the hearing room with all of that preparation loaded. He was flanked by senior legal counsel. He wore a dark suit instead of his signature great e-shirt, a deliberate signal of deference. His opening statement was measured, self-critical in a controlled way, and carefully stopped short of Any real acknowledgement of wrongdoing, he expressed a commitment to child safety. He outlined the tools Meta had developed to protect young users. He spoke about investments in moderation infrastructure. It was a performance built to endure, and for the first 40 minutes of the hearing, it did. Then Senator Josh Hawley took the microphone. Hawley is not a tech industry specialist. He is not the senator Hollywood would cast as the crusading legislator who takes down big tech. But what Hawley had that morning was something no amount of prep could overcome. He had done the reading, not the summary, not the talking points, the actual document, every page of the Teen Mental Health Deep Dive, and he had brought it with him, printed, tabbed, and annotated. He did not begin with the document. That is the key strategic choice. You never lead with your strongest evidence. You build the foundation first. You get the witness to commit to a position. You let them feel the comfort of familiar ground. Then you take it away. Mr. Zuckerberg, Hawley began, his voice carrying the flat, deliberate pace of someone who had rehearsed the trajectory of this exact exchange many times. I want to ask you about what Instagram knew about its impact on teenage girls. Specifically, I want to ask whether you were aware at any point of internal research conducted by your own company on this subject. Zuckerberg's answer was a masterclass in managed evasion. He spoke of the company's ongoing work to understand user experience. He referenced the complex ecosystem of factors affecting teenage mental health. He was smooth and practiced, with the comfortable energy of a witness navigating a minefield he believed he had already memorized. Let me be more specific, Hawley said. He reached down to the desk in front of him and lifted the document, not theatrically, not with a flourish for the cameras. He lifted it the way a surgeon lifts an instrument, with the economy of motion of someone who knows exactly what he is about to do with it. I am referring to an internal Meta research document titled Teen Mental Health Deep Dive, produced by your company's own research team. Are you familiar with that document? The shift in the room was immediate. Zuckerberg's legal counsel, seated just behind him, leaned forward, slightly but unmistakably the movement of people who had just seen something they did not expect to see in this room at this moment. Zuckerberg's answer revealed everything. Senator, Meta conducts a significant amount of internal research across a wide range of topics. I'm asking about this specific document, Hawley said, his voice dropping half a register, cutting cleanly through the deflection. Are you familiar with it? Yes or no? In cross-examination, there is a concept called narrowing. It is the moment when a skilled questioner refuses abstraction. The witness's defense lies in abstraction, in policy language, in broad frameworks, in the industry rather than this company, in research programs rather than this document. Every time Hawley narrowed, he stripped away another layer of protection, not aggressively, surgically. I'm aware the company conducts research on teen well-being, Zuckerberg said carefully. This document, Hawley continued, holding it steady, which was produced inside your company, states, and I am going to read this exactly as written, we make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. Did you know that? The silence that followed was not the pause of a politician timing a sound bite. It was the silence of a man watching the wall he intended to hide behind collapse in a single sentence. Zuckerberg's entire prepared defense was built around the claim that the relationship between social media and teen mental health was complex, multifactorial, and unsettled science. Hawley had just read him a line from his own researchers saying the opposite in plain language. Senator, I think the research on this topic is... Sir, Hawley's voice was quiet, patient. I didn't ask you to characterize the research. I asked whether you knew that your company found it made body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. I am reading your company's own words back to you. Did you know that? What happened next is where the hearing crossed the line from oversight into something more historic. Senator Lindsey Graham, sitting at the far end of the dais, leaned into his microphone. He had a different question. He did not have a document. He had something that no legal preparation in the world can truly prepare a witness for. He had the people. Mr. Zuckerberg, Graham said, his voice lacking Hawley's prosecutorial edge. This was different, slower, heavier. There are parents in this room today, mothers and fathers who lost children. I'd like you to stand up, and I'd like you to turn around and look at them. In 20 years of Senate hearings, across thousands of hours of testimony, that instruction had effectively never been given to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. There was no prepared answer, no legal objection, no corporate script for the simple human command to stand up and face the people whose children are dead. Zuckerberg's counsel did not move. There was no legal basis for objecting to a senator asking a witness to acknowledge the people in the room. Zuckerberg stood, he turned, and for 11 seconds, 11 of the longest, most publicly witnessed seconds in recent American corporate history, the founder and CEO of Meta looked directly at a gallery of parents holding photographs of their children. teenagers, some barely old enough to have had a profile on the platform that played a role in ending their lives, girls with eating disorders accelerated by Instagram's comparison algorithms, boys pushed self-harm content by a recommendation engine optimized for engagement, children who left digital breadcrumbs searches, saved posts, content interactions that the platform's own internal data could recognize as distress signals, and monetized. Anyway, 11 seconds of a man who controls the social lives of 3 billion people standing in a government hearing room looking at what that control has cost. Then he said 2 words, "I'm sorry." The room did not erupt. There was no applause, no catharsis, no release. It reacted the way a room reacts when something true and devastating has been said out loud and no one knows what to do with it because the apology, however real it may have felt in that moment, cannot bring anyone back. One mother in the gallery, who had traveled from Ohio with a framed photograph of her 17-year-old daughter, did not acknowledge the apology with a nod or a gesture. She held the photograph higher, she did not look away, and in the visual record of that hearing, that image, a mother holding her daughter's face toward the man whose platform she believes helped kill her, is the frame that reduces the trillion-dollar edifice of Silicon Valley to rubble. Hawley was not finished. After Zuckerberg sat back down, Hawley returned to the document. He did not let the emotional gravity of the moment become a resting place, because in legal strategy, the worst mistake a questioner can make after a powerful emotional beat is to stop. The witness is off balance. This is when you press. "I want to go back to what I showed you," Hawley said, "because I want the American people to understand the full timeline." He turned to a specific page. "This research was conducted in 2019. In 2021, your company, knowing these findings, launched Instagram Kids, a version of Instagram designed specifically for children under 13. Is that correct?" The question landed like a second charge, detonating after the first had already blown open the wall. Zuckerberg began to answer. "Senator, we paused the Instagram Kids project after." Hawley cut in precisely. "You paused it after this research existed, after your own team documented the harm, after the findings were in the building. The question I have for the record is simple. At the time the decision was made to develop a product specifically targeting children under 13, were the findings of this research known to product leadership at this company?" There was no clean answer. If he says yes, the company knowingly built a product for children while possessing research showing its platform harmed children. If he says no, then either the research was withheld from leadership, its own form of organizational failure, or he is lying under oath in front of the United States Senate. Zuckerberg's counsel shifted. One attorney placed a hand flat on the desk, not touching Zuckerberg, but making themselves physically present in the space, reminding the witness they were there. "Senator, I would need to look at the specific timeline of communications to give you a fully accurate answer on that. In a courtroom, that answer is called a non-denial denial. It confirms nothing. It denies nothing. It asks for the timeline the questioner is about to produce anyway, because the questioner already has it." Hawley had it. He did not read the whole thing aloud. He did not need to. He submitted it to the record, the communications, the timestamps, the architecture of what the company knew, who knew it, and when. "For the record," Hawley said, looking up from the pages, "I am submitting to this committee a timeline of internal meta-communications regarding teen safety research, which demonstrates that findings consistent with this document were circulated to product vice presidents, growth leads, and senior management beginning in 2019. And continuing through the decision to develop Instagram Kids in 2020 and 2021, the committee will draw its own conclusions." He placed the document face up on the desk and leaned back in his chair. The hearing continued. More senators asked more questions, but the architecture of the moment was already permanent. The research existed, the company had it, the platform expanded anyway, and the leader of the company that made that decision had just stood up, turned around, and said 2 words to the parents of the dead. "What do you do with that?" That is the question legal scholars, policymakers, and parents across America have been wrestling with ever since the cameras stopped rolling. Because unlike the Fifth Amendment, which has clearly defined legal implications, an apology triggers nothing. An apology is not a subpoena. It is not an admission of liability in a civil proceeding. It is, legally speaking, 2 words that generate no formal consequence whatsoever, and the parents in that gallery know it. The families who organized, traveled to Washington, held their photographs, and sat through a day of senatorial questioning understand something the legal and political system is still struggling to codify. The damage done to their children did not happen in spite of the platform's success. It happened because of it, the algorithm. That shattered their children's self-image was the same algorithm that drove engagement, lengthened session time, and maximized the advertising revenue that made Meta one of the most profitable companies in the history of commerce. The damage was not a flaw in the system, it was a feature of it. Hawley said it plainly before yielding his time. You've made billions off of a product that your own research told you was hurting children. I want to make sure the American people understand that. You didn't fail to know, you knew, and you built it anyway. Meta's legal team immediately issued a statement disputing the characterization of the research. The company argued the document had been taken out of context, that correlation does not establish causation, and that Meta has invested billions in safety features since the research was conducted. All of that may be true, none of it changes what is written in the document, none of it changes those 11 seconds. So here is where I hand it to you. You have heard the breakdown, you understand what was in that room, the document, the parents, the question with no survivable answer. You understand that the most powerful technology executive in the world stood up in a United States Senate hearing, turned around, and apologized to the families of children his platform helped destroy. What I want to know from you is this: is an apology enough? When a company possesses internal research documenting the harm its product causes to children and builds that product anyway, what accountability should look like is still not fully defined in American law. Should it be? Leave your answer in the comments, because the conversation happening there matters not just as reaction, but as the kind of public pressure that eventually becomes policy. Hit the like button if you think this story deserved more coverage than it got. Share it with anyone who uses Instagram or has a child who does. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The lawsuits are moving, the congressional pressure is building, and there are more documents where that one came from. Stay sharp. I'll see you in the next hearing room.